So a couple weeks ago, I did a segment on Operation Snow White, which was a massive espionage and dirty tricks campaign carried out by the Guardian Office, Scientology's black ops spy agency. And when I was writing that segment, I suddenly recalled the very mysterious, purposefully obscured Mormon one that still exists, but I couldn't remember its totally forgettable anodyne name. So I DM'd my friend Bryce Blankenagel, he of the madly deep dive Mormon history podcast Naked Mormonism, to ask him if he remembered what it's called, and boy, did he. So I've invited Bryce here today to talk about the Strengthening Church Members Committee, or as I like to call it, the LDS-CIA. Bryce, welcome back to the How To Heretic.
Thanks so much for having me, Uncle Mark. It really is a pleasure, and I mean, this is my forte, man. I love talking about shadow stuff that the church is up to.
Yes, you probably more than anyone else. I'm not sure who's dug quite as deeply and for as long as you have. So you are a blue ribbon shit disturber for those guys, and we'll get to what they know about that in a bit. So let me give a very brief background to this Latter-day Snitches spy game for boys, and you can tell me what I got wrong. Okay.
Okay.
So
I doubt it.
Mormonism used to not only have an actual for-real army, the Nauvoo Legion, in its rabidly anti-American early days, but a secret army of sorts as well called the Danites. We'll get into them another time. In addition to its overt and covert armies, it had a very overt, straight-up murderer named Orrin Porter Rockwell, and a lesser-known but equally homicidal one named Wild Bill Hickman. Because in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, "Gather unto ye all manner of spies, thugs, assassins, secret armies, because the truth needs murderers, and my love needs to be expressed via extrajudicial murder and blood atonement."
Blood atonement. I was hoping you would say blood atonement. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Oh,
so
yeah,
good.
Of course. It's hard to not talk about it with these people.
Yep.
So when Mormon church founder Joseph Smith was doing a little stretch in the Liberty Jail, he wrote a bitchy letter about how some committee should be set up to keep track of all the haters of him in the church, because, what harm has ever come from keeping lists of enemies when you're so singularly good at making them?
Yeah, Joseph's list.
Joseph's list. So this letter was codified in Scripture as Doctrine and Covenants, section 123. We shan't bore the good people with its daunting length and skull-crushing tedium, but it is Mormon Scripture. And as far as I can tell, Bryce, it's hard to know when exactly what we know today as the Strengthening Church Members Committee, or as I like to call it, the David O. McKGB, deep ward ball cut there, the official Black Ops Department of Corporate Mormonism became an official thing. But it's at minimum since 1990 when something called the Pace Memorandum, a secret internal church document, leaked. It's a description of investigation by General Authority Glenn L. Pace, who was a very high-ranking church mucky-muck at the time, looking into scores of claims of satanic ritual abuse perpetrated by members against other members. In this secretive...
Also known as D&D.
Yeah, that's right. In it, the secretive committee is named by Pace, and he refers further action to them. Historian D. Michael Quinn writes about the Strengthening Church Members Committee in his book, Mormon Hierarchy Extensions of Power. Here's a couple quick excerpts. Building on files while Ezra Taft Benson was an apostle related to surveillance of LDS professors and students suspected of being left-wing, liberal, communist, or socialist, staff members of this now centralized committee began maintaining files on every member of the church regarded as critical of LDS policies or too liberal.
Right.
He later continues, statements considered controversial about LDS policy to national media are also targets for these files. In addition, the committee uses operatives to obtain tape recordings of every Mormon who gives presentations at public forums regarded as suspicious. As a glimpse into the extent of these files, a history professor at Utah State University, Ross Peterson, was informed during a meeting at LDS headquarters in 1990 that his surveillance file included an anti-war statement he made as an undergraduate in college.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so...
That's real great. Real great.
And a lot of listeners might remember this moment. In 2012, in a BBC BBC Two documentary in 2012, that's a lot for me to get my mouth around, journalist John Sweeney asks both church spokesman Michael Purdy and Apostle Jeffrey R. Holland about the Strengthening Church Members Committee, and both are deeply spooked and caught off guard by the question.
Right.
Purdy first denies any knowledge before confirming its existence a few seconds later as he gasps for air like a fish. And Holland, not a bright man, flails just as badly trying to play it down as some obscure polygamy watchdog in a basement office, but he wouldn't even know where to find it if he tried.
You can crawl over or under or around the SCMC.
Yeah, exactly. So, first deny, then evade, then panic. The body language is hilarious.
Yeah, it's an iconic video clip. I encourage people to look it up. Really amazing.
It's deeply uncomfortable. So, much more recently, through a series of odd circumstances, the podcaster known as Radio Free Mormon found out the committee likely had a file on him and was given the number of a current high-ranking member of the committee, Elder Timothy J. Dykes, which Radio Free Mormon called and spoke to. Dykes did indeed have a file, or alluded to the fact that they had a file on the Dissident Mormon podcaster, but demanded his real name in order to discuss it further, which Radio Free Mormon declined because betraying yourself is only cool if you're still a Mormon. So, Bryce, how'd I do? Did I get the basics of what we know about this Mormon espionage program?
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually attribute the formation of it to, obviously under the presidency of Ezra Taft Benson in the 1980s, I attribute a lot of that to the influence of Mark Hoffman on Mormon history. And we can spend a bit of time on that, but really the fundamental problem that anybody has when they want to look up information on the SCMC is that it's a blackout. There's almost nothing about it except a couple of blog posts, a very thin Wikipedia page, and then a very brief Fair Mormon article that's like, it doesn't exist, but it sort of does exist, but it's, kind of the Jeffrey R. Holland stuff. So there's no official statement from the church about what the SCMC is or whether or not it even exists. So what do we do? What do we go with? Well, instead, I chose to take a look today more at the history of the church's clandestine efforts and the utilization of these various shadow enforcement squads. You alluded to them with Joseph Smith in the Liberty Jail in Missouri and the Danites. I want to walk through a little bit of that history and how it was brought over into Utah and implemented into Utah, and kind of the history of how that all kind of played out leading up to Mark Hoffman and Ezra Taft Benson in the 1980s when the SCMC was officially formed, because this is history that Mormons don't know this history, right? If the church obscures the historicity of the Book of Mormon, they're definitely going to do everything possible to ignore the church's history of shadow enforcement squads and assassination rings.
Yeah, look, the secret to staying a faithful Mormon is to know almost nothing about Mormon history.
Absolutely.
That's the only way you can pull it off.
Yeah, and there are a few, a number of my colleagues are, members of the church who believe that it is true, but are historians who have written extensively about these topics, and I can't even begin to wrap my mind around that. I mean, even Dan's mom is an example of somebody that falls into that camp. Yeah. So in order to put a pin in the beginning of this, I'm going to the Brother of Gideon Society, right? So in Kirtland era church, this is Joseph Smith started the church in New York. Then he was exiled from New York, moved the church to Kirtland. He was exiled from Kirtland, moved the church to Missouri. Exiled from Missouri by order of the governor, moved the church to Nauvoo, where he was summarily assassinated. But this traces its lineage all the way back to the Kirtland era church and the formation of the Kirtland Safety Society, which was the bank that the church formed in order to print their own money.
Right.
They needed to be able to enforce and keep people within line of buying and selling and speculating on the banknotes that they printed. William Wines Phelps was one of these people who suffered the wrath of the Brother of Gideon Society. But unfortunately, there are only 2 contemporary documents that exist that even allude to the existence of the Brother of Gideon Society. So we don't really know much about it. We just know that that was the earliest prototype that formed the foundation for the Daughters of Zion, which were later named the Danites, right?
Yeah.
And the Danites were super useful. They were first implemented against 2, super cool cats in early Mormonism, David Whitmer and Oliver Cowdery, right?
Yeah.
If people don't know those guys, Oliver Cowdery was the scribe for the Book of Mormon, and both David Whitmer and Oliver Cowdery were, 2 of the 3 witnesses of the gold plates, right?
Yeah.
The Danite Manifesto gave them 72 hours to leave town or their blood would run, right? They were the salt that had lost its savor. It was good for nothing but to be trodden underfoot, according to Sidney Rigdon.
Right.
So the Danites in Missouri, they intimidated elected officials and forced them to sign documents exempting the Mormons from certain laws under duress. They ambushed Captain Bogart's troops at Crooked River. They raided and pillaged local non-Mormon settlements. They stole wagon trains of arms and supplies from the Missouri militias. They were really, really bad dudes. And finally,
bunch of assholes, really.
A bunch of assholes. And often doing these things, if you can make it any worse, in blackface to disguise
oh my God, of
their
course.
identities.
Yeah. Right. Classic.
But unfortunately, we had a couple of defectors within the ranks of the Danites. We had Dr. Samson Avard and Thomas B. Marsh, who defected from the Danites, and they provided the state of Missouri with a copy of the Danite Manifesto, which gave Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer 72 hours to leave town. And that ended up landing Joe and 50 of his friends in jails all across Missouri after the surrender at Far West and Adamant-Diomen during the Missouri Mormon War. It's really bad. They all ended up breaking out of prison, and they fled to the new Mormon settlement that was in Illinois after Lilburn Boggs signed the Mormon extermination order and said, you can't be Mormon in Missouri, get the fuck out. And in Illinois, they could exercise lawlessness with absolute impunity. It's truly remarkable.
Right.
So Nauvoo Joseph Smith learned from the mistakes of Missouri Joseph Smith, and he understood that quality control mechanisms needed to be in place to make sure that the most trusted elites could indeed be trusted. And this worked to a point, but a few slipped through the cracks, and they made life really hard for Joe throughout Nauvoo. Notably, John C. Bennett. He was a member of the highest-ranking offices of the church. He defected, wrote a huge expose, and the Mormon settlement was gripped with that expose for the following 2 years until Joseph and Hiram were dead. However, Joe's personal friend from back in the New York days, they were childhood buddies, Porter Rockwell, he was head of the Destroying Angel Company of the Danites. He attempted to assassinate Governor Lilburn Boggs, who kicked the Mormons out of Missouri in the first place. So it wasn't all about just intimidating judges and then vetting new members of the leadership. These guys actually did commit murder. And then Joseph Smith was arrested in Dixon, Illinois in 1843 by constables from Missouri working on special orders from the governor at the time. They wanted to extradite Joseph Smith to answer for his war crimes in Missouri, for treason, for murder, for larceny, for arson. When they tried to extradite him, a company of Danites found the group as they were headed towards Missouri, and those Danites arrested the sheriffs and brought everybody into Nauvoo, into Joe's little safe haven, and then those sheriffs who arrested Joseph Smith in the first place barely escaped Nauvoo with their lives.
Jesus Christ.
Obviously, this causes the non-Mormon settlements to lose their fucking minds!
Yeah.
Mormonism was so damn powerful in Illinois, and fury grew over the power and the wealth of the Mormon leadership in Nauvoo. And, of course, dissenting voices from within the church grew along with it. And eventually, 7 trusted Mormon elites published the Nauvoo Expositor, which was an expose of Joseph Smith and polygamy and Mormon politics, Joseph's presidential pamphlet, and just general abuses of power in the Nauvoo government, hiding criminals and fugitives from justice, and a bunch of other stuff.
Right.
So that Expositor printing press was destroyed at the behest of Joseph Smith as mayor, as prophet, and as commander-in-chief of his Nauvoo Legion, which you alluded to in your opening
his little
essay.
army.
Yeah. So he held 3 pillars of society in his palm: government, religion, and military, right?
Right.
Absolute power corrupts.
Yeah.
So because the Expositor printing press was destroyed at Joe's request, criminal charges were filed against Joseph and Hiram, and martial law was declared in the city, and the Danites were on a constant night watch of the city's most valuable assets, including their own printing press and Joseph Smith's Nauvoo mansion where he was sleeping at night. During this time, Illinois was on the brink of war, and the anti-Mormon newspaper, the Warsaw Signal, published court records from Missouri back in 1838 during the Missouri Mormon War concerning the Danites, and that ginned up public fury against the extremely dangerous religion that was Mormonism. They also declared themselves a sovereign city-state to Congress, which that's
that
kind
goes
of an act
over
of
really
treason.
well.
Yeah. It's kind of, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to like make a government inside of a government.
That won't elicit a response.
Yeah. So eventually, with war on on the horizon between the state of Illinois militias and the Nauvoo Legion, Joe eventually agreed to be arrested, and he was assassinated in a drunken gunfight where he wounded 3 men with his own pistol and possibly killed 2 of those guys.
Wow.
So, with the prophet, military leader, and mayor dead, a schism crisis ensued, and the Darwinian principles of social movements provided that only the most ruthless leader walked away with the largest contingent of Mormons.
Yeah.
Bloody goddamn Brigham Young, the Hitler of Mormonism, with 4 universities and a city bearing his name.
I know. He was ruthless, but he was also just kind of a dumbass, and it's so hilarious to me that there are 4 universities named after this utter piece of garbage.
But he was also an absolute autocrat. And he ruled his empire through a system of meritocracy and nepotism. And the merits were how well you carried out the mission of building the kingdom of God. And whatever you were willing to do that proved that you were a ruthless person who was capable of doing whatever Brigham Young requested or demanded, that's what got you elevated through the ranks in Utah. And also, along with that, granted you more wives, coincidentally.
Right. Sure.
So they got out to Mexico. It fucking sucked out there. First off, Native Americans were all over their new promised land, so that had to be dealt with immediately.
Rude.
Famine and pestilence struck. Wars broke out off and on between the Mormons and the Native Americans, and usually resulted in mass casualties for the natives, who then resorted to pillaging the Mormon settlements just for survival. And then the Compromise of 1850 carved out the Utah Territory out of Mexico, and it instated Brigham Young as governor of the slaveholding theocracy.
Right.
So absolute fealty to Zion was required if you wanted to live peacefully in Utah. So Brigham's governorship was set to end in 1858, and he refused to step down, which riled the Mormons up into an anti-government frenzy. Defectors broke off with wagon trains passing through Utah to California during the gold rush, and upon their arrival, they would share information with the press, or apostate newspapers would crop up in Utah before they were immediately destroyed or they were threatened out of existence. So opposition outside of and within Utah was growing, and it needed to be quashed, so Bloody Brigham Young organized the Mormon Reformation period. So the Mormon Reformation means that every member of the church, every single person living in Utah who was a member, had to be interviewed by their bishop and rebaptized.
Is that true? I didn't know that.
Yes.
Everybody.
And punishments followed for anybody with a faltering testimony. This is when the home teaching program started, in order to keep very close tabs on members and report everything back to fucking headquarters in Salt Lake City, right?
Just open spying.
Open spying, yes. That's how the home teaching program started, was during this Mormon Reformation period. They also instated dress codes and other very cult-like and totalitarian decrees that members had to follow. And if you didn't, the Danites might show up. The Danites were really active at this time, including Porter Rockwell, Bill Hickman, Hosea Stout, Jedediah Grant, known as Brigham's Sledgehammer. They were active, but a lot of it was just intimidation tactics, but sometimes in making folks just disappear. And whenever somebody from the community disappeared, the members of that community knew better than to ask questions or talk about the disappeared person ever again.
Of course, they completely understood. It was like Stalinist Russia.
Yes, yeah. Somebody gets sent to the gulag, somebody disappears, you just don't talk about them. You don't ask questions.
Yeah.
So during this period, President Buchanan organized a federal militia to remove Bloody Brigham from his seat of governor by force. So the Mormons prepared for war, and any wagons passing through Utah in 1856 through 58 were regarded with general skepticism. During this time, Apostle Parley P. Pratt was murdered by a guy in Arkansas after stealing his wife. and a wagon train that was passing through at the time was blamed for it. So Brigham Young claimed that this wagon train was full of government spies who were going to bring the downfall of the kingdom of God. And then the Mormons murdered every single person under the age of 7 in this wagon train.
Over the age of 7, and then they redistributed the children to the local community, right?
Thank you. I misspoke. Yes, every person under over the age of 7 was just murdered in cold blood.
Yeah.
And that just added another cool 120 people to the death toll of thousands of Native Americans by this point.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And we could get into Wakara and slave trading and gun running, and the tumultuous relationship between Brigham Young and Wakara. They're kind of like Rachel and Ross, off again, on again type of relationship, but it's maybe for another time.
Right.
So as Buchanan's troops were coming into Utah, they were passing through Nebraska and Wyoming. The Mormon militia, the Danites, guerrilla terrorized the troops as they were trying to unseat Brigham Young. But then a deal was struck, a stalemate was reached, and Brigham stepped down and invited his non-Mormon successor into the territory to be the new governor. But Buchanan's troops, because Mormonism at this time was so very insular and isolationist, Buchanan's troops also instated some non-Mormons into other government positions like judges and administrators, congresspeople. But those people were so terrorized by their Mormon coworkers that most of them fled the territory within just a few years of getting the job.
Right, of course.
So fast forward a few decades, Utah was again riled up into anti-government fury for the multiple anti-bigamy laws that were passed at the federal level and for the government's efforts to enforce those anti-bigamy laws. Also, it kind of sucked that slavery was going on and that slavery was no longer legal. It's kind of like the South. Utah was considered a state just like the South was, a slave state. When you structure your economy around a certain amount of your workforce being slave labor and you have to start paying those people, it kind of sucks for the people who own those people, right? Shed a tear for the slaveholders.
Yeah.
For my cracker ancestors.
What a pity.
Yeah. So eventually the church caved, polygamy was outlawed, and Utah officially gained statehood in 1896. And then into the 1920s, 1930s, 40s, various people were excommunicated for publicly advocating polygamy, while simultaneously many of the apostles and the prophets themselves had multiple wives. So you could have multiple wives. You could even, like solemnize new polygamous marriages. You just couldn't publicly advocate for it.
Right.
And it was through these clandestine spying groups and efforts, it wasn't SCMC yet at the time, but it's still the same thing, that they were able to root out those people, find out what they were publishing, newspaper clippings about those people, and, find out who they are and excommunicate them.
Right.
So the church retained relatively comfortable control through kind of the 1930s all the way into the 1970s with only a few hiccups here and there. However, a crafty little dude started making a name for himself in Mormon history named Mark Hoffman. And this guy...
Yeah. Now, you can summarize real quick, but Doug did a really deep dive on him a couple weeks ago. But summarize him so someone listening for the first time would know.
Yeah, for sure. So he bought and sold a shitload of documents, and some of them were stuff that he just made in his basement. So after he was discovered, after he blew himself up and killed a couple of people, and he was thrown in jail, the church president at the time, Ezra Taft Benson, wanted a way of keeping a systematic eye on everybody, not just potential problem children like Mark Hoffman. So he formed the SCMC, as best we can guess, sometime in the mid-1980s to spy on everybody and to ensure that the members of the church are loyal. And from that point forward, SCMC has remained in the shadows, and as near as we can figure, it's been utilized to assassinate the characters of every high-profile excommunication from that point forward. Its first tour de force really was the September 6th. These 6 historians and public speakers who were writing critical history about the church that it didn't like, or not just history, but also social commentary and women having the priesthood authority. And the church didn't like it, and the SCMC figured heavily into compiling the dossiers about all of these people and getting all of their statements pulled out of context or whatever the case was necessary in order to have the excommunications go forward, to paint them as true apostates.
Right.
So you're a member of the church and you've ever even written a Facebook post or a blog post that isn't perfectly awesome about how great the church is, you probably have a file. You can't see it. You don't have access to it. You have absolutely no way of knowing the contents of that file. They just collect all of that data without you clicking agree on any terms of service page.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly. And it used to be that this kind of clandestine bullshit was dependent on human-to-human contact, or at least somebody going through your garbage or your mailbox. And they still probably do that.
Right.
But
it's
now,
a cyber age now,
it's so easy to monitor everybody on social media.
Yep.
And so,
fun fact for everybody: the government's largest NSA office is in Ogden, fucking Utah. Staffed by majority of Mormons. Super
that
awesome.
Can't be anything but a coincidence.
Yeah, it's pure coincidence, of course.
Yeah, so I took my name off the records 15 years ago, Bryce. So I don't know if they would have had anything on me. I don't know if they're still tracking, people like our podcast, which none of us have our names in the church, but we agitate against the crimes of Mormonism fairly frequently. So I would imagine there's some record. And now you have not taken your name off the church records.
That's correct.
So I understand that you tried to contact the Strengthening Church Members Committee to see what your file might say.
That is correct as well. So if anyone wants to hear the phone call, as well as hear myself as well as my two panelists talk about the phone call, you go listen to Mormon Happy Hour episodes. It's I think like 71 through 73 or something like that. It's
I think that's right.
Yeah. So Mormon Happy Hour, that's where we play the recording. We talk about this issue. We do like 2 hours of recording just discussing the church's clandestine efforts and how this figures into their ability to cover up abuse that happens in the church, obviously, as well. And the SCMC's work in doing the leg work, the stuff that takes the time, collecting information to compile dossiers on people like McKenna Denson and other public advocates against the church, as well as people within the church like Sam Young, right? We called Elder Dyke's office. We tried to talk to him, and we were met with an answering service, a very kind secretary. Yeah. And it was very clear that she had a hard couple of days, because we called at the same time that a lot of people called, as Radio Free Mormon had just leaked onto the ex-Mormon spheres the direct phone call or phone number to the SCMC office, Elder Dyke's office. We assumed she had a hard day, but it became abundantly clear to us that the only way we could access or receive any information about the contents of our folder was by talking to our bishop. And notably, one of my co-panelists, Leslie, she suffered abuse by her bishop. So if she wants to know the contents of her file, she can't go to that bishop and ask him, because that's not how reality works. That's insane. It's an insane proposition. Yes. And I think it's important for people to understand, yes, they're snooping social media, and there are allegations on some of the subreddits that they have sniffer programs that can sniff stuff out, that they're running, in email servers. But I think probably the backbone of this snitching program is still person-to-person stuff. There are people in your ward spying on you right now. Yeah. Right? There are people in your community kind of keeping track of what they consider what is appropriate behavior for you and what is not. Yeah. And to me, that's insane. That's an insane way to enforce an orthodoxy, rather than just let people kind of be who they are and come and go and be part of a thing because they see value in it, or leave it if they don't. Right. It's like it's a cult or something. And only the utmost compliance. I guess you could compare it to a cult of some kind. Yeah. Well, and we should really let's spend a little bit of time just discussing what it says about that institution that requires having stuff like the SCMC, and more than that, having such deep roots of clandestine, dare I say, secret combinations within the structure of the church from the very foundation of it. What does it say about that institution that requires these Orwellian spy agencies in order to, retain like this very, I don't know, I guess draconian control over their membership?
I think it says that it is an institution from baked right into the bread. It's an institution that is deeply insecure about its truth claims and about its history.
Absolutely.
So I think it's a bad thing, Bryce.
And also requires people to be ignorant in order to ensure that compliance.
Right, and part of this espionage program is not only controlling members, but a desperate attempt to control its own history, and to control what's known about its own history that has become increasingly difficult in the information age. So
right, and if somebody is successfully branded as an apostate, not a single word that comes out of their mouth will be regarded as credible by any members. Right, that was the most tragic result of the September 6th back in 1993 was these were critical scholars who, some of them had worked for BYU, some of them had worked for the church at some point in their careers, who had been writing history. And not when I say critical history, I say critical because it wasn't the party line. It wasn't the correlated narrative of history that the church has been manufacturing for 150 years. Right.
It was following the proper methodology to arrive at what a history is.
Right.
And that was unacceptable.
And this was coming at the infancy of the feminist Mormon history movement. And the book Women in Authority really was a scourge on the church leadership because it made the historical case that women exercised the priesthood the same way that the men did in Nauvoo, and that it was largely due to Brigham Young that shut it down in the hiatus period of the Relief Society from 1845 until 1867 when he allowed it to be reorganized. And that women did have authority under Joseph Smith to exercise the priesthood. And basically anybody who was attached with that suffered some repercussions or was a member of the September 6th who were excommunicated. That has scared away critical scholarship about women having the priesthood for decades following it. The church has still... The blight that the Mormon history community has suffered because of that blow still remains to this day. And it truly is an absolute tragedy.
Yeah, and it was purposeful intimidation, and clearly it's worked. So
it's effective. Yep.
Well, listen, Bryce, thank you so much. I'm a little embarrassed you came so unprepared with so little information.
I'm sorry. I'm terrible at my job.
Pretty tragic. So listen, you are fantastic, and
thank you.
If listeners want to, if for some reason they don't know who you are and where to find you, who are you and where do they find you?
Right. So I do a couple of podcasts, Mormon related. So Naked Mormonism, that's a serialized history. Hey, we're like 4 days away from Carthage, so it's a really intense time. A lot of the stuff that we talked about today is, it's all stuff that I know from researching about that. I also do current events, Glassbox podcast. Thanks so much for inviting me on to talk about this.
You're welcome anytime, man.
This is stuff that I just salivate. As soon as I got that message from you, I'm like, oh, I cannot
I figured, and
someday
soon we'll be looking at this conversation in your file together. So
exactly.
All right,
we need a leak. We need a leaker.
Come on, leak. All right, thanks, Bryce.
Thanks,
Let's
Uncle
move
Mark.
on.
Take care.